Welcome friends. In today's video, we'll hear a story, told from the pages of an aged journal. An intimate story, of vivid and personal detail. Do you write down your innermost thoughts? What would you do if that book, containing your most private considerations, was laid bare before another? Today, we'll experience one such tale, and uncover the mental workings of someone whose life has been turned on its head. Before we dive in, please be sure to leave us a like, subscribe to the channel, share the video with a friend, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Perhaps we'll feature your comment in a future video. I'd like to thank all of our current subscribers. This video is made possible by viewers like you. Now, enjoy the story. Our swing set is a gallows now. Does anyone know what really happened to Beckwith, New Hampshire? I know that's a weird question, but I can't find it on Google or anywhere. A few days ago, I was hiking not far from the Sandwich Mountain trailhead off of Route 49 and I found a dingy copy of Goodnight Moon, a flashlight and a journal in a plastic shopping bag near the trail. The book had a sticker inside the cover from the Beckwith Public Library, which doesn't seem to exist. The journal was missing a decent number of pages, but it was in good enough shape to read. So I did my best to type it out, because it's, well, you'll see. I live not too far from where I found the journal, and now, every time I hear the hush of wind through the leaves above it gives me the fucking creeps. November 14th. I will never see another spring of that. I am almost certain, for now. The wind blows and rattles the window panes and I sit beside the wood stove and listen to the crackle of burning logs and wait. David left 3 days ago with the children. I wouldn't have let him if I had had the energy to fight, but I slept through his departure. He knew how little food we had left. I don't blame him for going, but I do blame him for staying gone. And I blame him for taking Isla and Max with him. He knows how dangerous the night has become, almost as dangerous as the day. Isla still thinks there are monsters in the closet, but I know there are monsters out there. And I can't help her. Perhaps these past few weeks cooped up began to wear on him. I know they've worn on me. When Roger was screaming and Theo cried, when he looked to us for help we couldn't give, that was enough to run away from. And the day that David left, I caught him crying beside the drawn curtains of one of our bedroom windows. It seemed like it was probably a sunny day, but David knows better than to look. Initially, I had wondered if it was the first time I had seen him cry. He was always so reserved, always such a strong parent when I wasn't. He's been strong throughout all of this, too. If it weren't for him, Isla and Max would have only seen my fear. It would have been hard for me to convince them alone that the hiding game was actually a game. But now David is gone. My children are gone, and I am left to comfort Theo while his father sweats and moans on a sofa stained with blood. Roger still hasn't said how he lost so much of his leg. He barely says anything at all. But he did say one thing as David dragged him through our door. It wasn't my wife. It wasn't Justine. Theo had cried and David was strong enough for compassion. He told me that the food would last, that it would be enough for all of us. One thing I need most of all right now is his strength to tell the little lies he knows I won't believe. I'm hungry. Theo's stomach growls and I give him my meager portions and smoke instead to stave off the constant nag of slow starvation. I have most of a carton of Parliaments that David took from the booker's place down the street. Maggie smoked. Now she's dead. Lucky me I guess. The day David left, it wasn't the first time he'd cried in front of me. I remembered the first time last night. We had gone to see Gianni Ricci at the Metropolitan Opera in New York. David said he'd rather go warm a bar stool somewhere instead, but I'd convinced him. It was an aria that did it. A beautiful voice dissolving a strong man in a moment of emotional purity. I can almost hear it now. The doleful melody number. I can hear it. It's one of them. The creatures that look like us. It's singing. Oh mio babino caro, mi piace, a tilde diaris ispello. They know our thoughts. I wonder if they feel my fear. November 15th. Day 4 without them. It's started to snow and I hope they're warm. Theo slept with me last night and asked me when his mother was coming back. I just hugged him. That was the only answer I could give. I don't know if I can do this without David. Theo needs someone who can reassure him in a way that I have lost the spirit to even pantomime. When Max was here, the two of them distracted each other. I watched them play in that way that only children can, oblivious to the strain around them. As much as I take heart from David's strength, I think the boys may have given me more. David is optimistic. He jokes and brushes off the ugliness of everything, but when I look closely I can see the hairline cracks of fear in his phi tilde section 8. When the boys laugh there's no subterfuge or patronizing comfort. They're just happy in spite of it all. They might be the only genuine piece of normalcy now. I miss them. I miss Max's weird factoids. I need Isla's little fingers twizzling tangles into my hair. I need them, good or bad or laughing or crying, but here, with me. Not knowing if they're hurt or scared or hungry feels like knowing they're all of those things. But I have to be strong for Theo, someone else's child. How? He's scared, but with Roger's mangled leg wrapped in plastic and gauze, and hidden beneath the blanket, it almost seems like he's just resting. That's what I tell Theo. His daddy's sick, so he needs to rest. But Roger's getting worse, even with David's attempt at cauterization. I light candles to mask the stench of decay and putrid flesh, but when I dress his wound, the smell always makes me gag. I've smelled it before. The smell of a junkie who stops moving and rots in the places rubbed raw by neglect. One day soon he won't look like he's resting anymore. Even a child can recognize the wrongness of a corpse. I need my family. For now I'll write an old prayer and hope he's listening. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. November 17th. Isla came back yesterday before dawn. She was alone, shivering and pink from the cold and carrying a shopping bag. I am trying to be happy, grateful that she kept all of her little fingers and toes out there. I am so grateful that she's alive, but I don't know what it means that David and Max haven't returned with her. I don't know how Isla got back either, or where she had been. I haven't asked her for details yet because I can still see the terror on her little face. I only asked her if everyone was okay. She said Daddy had a boo-boo, but she nodded. That was enough for the moment. She brought a half-empty vial of doxycycline HCl and syringes in her bag. I looked it up in a drug book. It's an antibiotic. For Roger, I guess. She also had 2 cans of beans. It's what we needed. Everything but the other missing pieces of my family. But Isla brought more than necessities. I don't know where David found it or if he sent it for Roger. I hope he did after what we went through. I hope he knows how much more difficult my struggle has become. I need him more than ever now, but he's gone somewhere and I can't talk to him. After our meal tonight, we have a little more than 1.5 cans of navy beans, 4 packs of cigarettes, and a balloon of heroin. Grant me the serenity for her. November 20. Last night one of them sang a part of Oh My Oh Babino Caro for hours outside a house. It sounded like a child's voice, but I couldn't bring myself to check. It's too unsettling to find one standing at the window when I open the curtains. The one that sang had a sweet voice, but she sang the same 2 lines over and over. Mi stra o e mi tormento. Odio, voroi mora. It translates to I am pining, I am tormented. Oh God, I would want to die. They toy with us and I don't know why. I don't know why we're still alive either when so many others aren't. It's been 9 days since David left with my little boy. There are moments where I forget them and others where I wish I could. I'm a terrible mother, a terrible wife. And I don't know how to tell Theo that his father isn't resting anymore. The antibiotics weren't enough. Theo will notice when he wakes and sees the empty sofa. I dragged Roger onto the porch. I don't have the strength to bury him. Now, we have 1 pack of cigarettes, half a can of beans and a balloon of heroin I should have flushed but haven't. I itch and my body twists because I know how easy serenity would come. I hate David for what he's done to us. Isla and Theo need a mother. They need strength. I just need. November 21. David would have buried Roger in the night instead of letting the frost suffice as a shroud, but we are different people. He would have given a eulogy, something hopeful and poignant, so that Theo could see that others knew and loved his father too. I told Theo that Roger went for help, that he got better all of a sudden. What the fuck is wrong with me? Soon enough, if David doesn't return, I'll have to tell him that both of his parents are dead. I dread the questions that news might bring. Most of all, will I die too? Should I lie to him? As I'm writing this, Theo and Isla are on the floor next to me. Theo's trying to teach Isla how to play Uno as I fill the air with smoke that sometimes makes them cough. I'm down to 9 cigarettes after this one. We won't have food for dinner tonight. And without David or Roger here, I'm the only one responsible. My fault. My failure at motherhood. Theo taught Isla about wild cards in their game, and now, she thinks every card can change the color. Sometimes she asks me which color I'd like. She smiles meekly, trying to break through my clenching muscles and gritting teeth. But the only colors I can bring to mind are powder brown, teaspoon silver and bubbling bronze. I settle on blue most times, the color of a raised vein, and then I look to the kitchen where I hid my temptation away. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. Roger was a good man, a cardiologist, a husband to a wife who rarely griped, and a father to a son who makes my daughter laugh. He collected rocks, geodes and minerals and things that he dug from the earth on vacations. He was intelligent, well-read, but he never made a show of it. He would deflect praise with self-deprecating jokes that almost always fell flat. He knew how to humanize his intellect. He was a neighbor. Tomorrow night I will try to dig a hole for him. Tonight, I'll look for food while the children are asleep. If I don't make it back, I have to make it back. November 23rd. Today is Thanksgiving and I am cooking rice and meat that I found the night before last. We had salted rice for breakfast again. Isla balked at it. She pouted, but Theo seems to understand that rice is all we have. He accepted it and she followed his lead while shying away from me at the table. I suppose I can accept being her bad guy as long as she's eating. Theo continues to smile in spite of everything. A waiter's smile though, dropping the moment he thinks Isla and I aren't looking. It's clever for a 10-year-old. I wonder if he doesn't share his father's smarts. If he knows that his parents are dead. He hasn't said so. He's a good kid. Too good for the meal I'm preparing. But I didn't find much rice. And he and Isla both need protein. I'm out of cigarettes. I need it too. November 26th. Isla is fine. She's fine. She has to be. I saw David last night. He came back, but it wasn't him. They took him, which means Max is D. I don't think I can do this. Isla is hiding and cackling again. She sings the song when they do, but she doesn't know the words, so she just shrieks along. Theo's afraid of her. I had to hide the knives, but she's only 4, my little girl, and I don't know if this is a symptom of something normal or abnormal or worse. I feel so alone. Theo's gotten curious about this journal. I'm not his mother, and I think the strangeness of my presence had started to set in for him. I'll have to tell him soon about Roger. He deserves the truth. But I am struggling to be good and alive at the same time. For now my goodness is wrapped up in fighting the urge to use. My skin crawls and my hands shake and I pace around in a frenzy looking for cigarettes I might have stashed away and forgotten. But I know what will happen if I use. I'll come down from my moment of oblivion and find an open door and an empty house. And it will be my fault. I don't know what the creatures are. What do they want? When does it end? Isla calls them the Hushers. I think she remembers more about her time away with David than she's willing to tell me. She's startled, shrieking again. I just want to help my little girl, but I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. November 27th. I have been sober for 5 years and 3 months. Isla crashed last night and after Theo went down I went into the bathroom and tied off a vein. I'm a bad mother, I know that. But I'm still a mother. The front door stayed closed and Isla is still sleeping. Theo is reading Harry Potter, the second one, I think. And for now, I feel okay. Tomorrow I'll feel okay, and the next day after. I don't have enough dope for it to be a problem. I'll be fine. I'm sorry. I shouldn't lie. I got blood on some of my pages yesterday and I couldn't stand the sight of the puckered brown edges, so I ripped them out. It made me think about this book and why I'm still writing all of this. It started with my sponsor years ago. She wanted me to write when I was having hard times with the kids and with life. I guess it became a habit. Eileen would have laughed at that. Now, I wonder if this book will be the part of me that survives. If it is, then I should be honest. One of the exercises Eileen made me do was writing truths. An easy one and a hard one. Addicts lie. The first step to recovery is breaking that down. The lies we tell ourselves, the excuses and the promises left to be fulfilled tomorrow. She told me to be honest, even if it hurts. So here goes. Easy. The moment I saw that gear bag, when I knew what it was, I knew I was going to use. I didn't flush the dope, because I wanted it. Hard. There is a part of me that doesn't want Tyler to wake up. Hard. I know David left to look for food, but I think he took the kids because he didn't trust me to be a parent without him. Hard. Our meat didn't come from a house. It came from our porch. Easy. I used again this morning. It won't be the last time. If I have the energy tomorrow, I'll write about the beginning. The pages where I talked about it are gone now. I didn't want to look at Roger's blood every time I tried to write. I don't want to think about what I've done to keep the kids alive. November 28th. I was holding Isla when she finally woke up last night. I was running my fingers through her hair. It's so dirty now, like greasy silk. She had Roger's blood on her chin. I don't know how long it's been there, and every little defect about her makes me feel like a failure. When she opened her eyes, she smiled up at me and blinked away her sleep. Mommy. She breathed the word with the softness of a lazy Saturday afternoon. Then, where did you put the knives? She finished the thought just as sweetly, and I felt nauseated. She's my little girl. She's supposed to be. But she left, and now that she's back, every time I look at her, she seems different. Wrong. She's playing with a doll right now, telling it to be quiet and making it sneak around the legs of tables. If I interrupt her, she shrieks and screams the melody of the song. She gets violent. So I just let her play her unsettling little game. Theo has been up in Max's room since I told him his father was dead. I won't tell him about the meat. There are some truths that even the best version of me is incapable of saying aloud. Oh, and yesterday I said that I'd try to write about the beginning, but I'm tired. Tomorrow, perhaps. November 29th/October 17th. It began with a brunch we were hosting at our house that had bled into afternoon drinks. Tess and Leo Salinger were over and we had the curtains drawn downstairs, but I can't remember why. Something David was planning. Around 1 o'clock I got a text message from Diana, a friend of mine who lives down on Cobb Street. It just said, "Don't look outside." I mentioned it aloud and Leo took it as an invitation. He was a few mimosas past tipsy, and if he hadn't done it, I might have. It was just a peek, but he seemed strangely enamored by what he saw. He said something about the pretty tulips and then turned back to us smiling with his nose suddenly gushing blood. Tess was the next to look. David went to get Leo a towel, but in the few seconds it took him, Leo's smile dropped and his eyes widened. I've never seen such exaggerated terror as I did when he began to scream. Tess joined a few moments later. Their screaming woke up Isla from her nap and I tried to keep her upstairs. David said afterward that I probably spared her years of nightmares. That both of the Salingers were vomiting blood and choking intermittently as they inhaled to scream more. David was strong though. He handled what he saw with a fortitude I still cannot fathom. He was also the one that called Roger to warn him. Max was playing with Theo. David's warning was nowhere near as intriguing as Diana's. The Salingers just bled to death in our living room because they looked outside. Get the boys the fuck away from the windows. If you look, if anyone looks, you'll die. Something like that. I don't know if what he said was accurate, but the way they died, No one would risk it. I do think David saved our son that day, I believe that. And then he took him to his death. I still haven't seen Max. I don't know if I can handle that. The hushers were our skins, I think. The first one I saw hadn't put it on correctly. The face was twisted a bit and the eye holes didn't line up with the A's beneath. It was a boy's skin, one not much older than Isla. He seemed familiar, but I don't think he was a child from our neighborhood. Beckwith is a small town, close-knit to the degree that anywhere is these days. It's about 4 miles north of Squam Lake in central New Hampshire, and if my mother can be believed, it was founded in 1860 by a grandfather of mine, several greats back. It's always been a quiet town, nestled away in the white pines and paper birches that run along Drake's Brook near Route 49. We know each other here. It's impossible not to, with a population just shy of 500. So whenever a person dies, we feel it, or we used to. I used to. Now, I've become numb. Also, Isla found the knives. There's a chef's knife missing, and when I asked her about it, she screamed and told me that I should be dead. Now she's reading Goodnight Moon like a perfectly normal child, but Theo is still avoiding us except for when it's time to eat. I can't blame him. We're falling apart, each of us becoming monstrous in our own way. I have 0 cigarettes, 2 cars that stopped working on October 17th and a house that hides us from daylight. I have heroin. I have Isla. I have several pounds of meat and a wood stove on which to cook it. I have life, but it's been so long since I have felt alive. God granted me the wisdom to know the difference, and I hate him for that. December 3. I think I'm going insane. Or I know I am, but I don't know how insane I've gone. How does someone judge such a thing for themselves? The past few days have been difficult. Isla has been hiding and leaving drawings for me to find. They're all the same. Pictures of dead people in a forest and the words "A good night nobody." It's a phrase from Goodnight Moon, one that I've always found unsettling in its ambiguity. But now, I think I've begun to understand it. The night is our time to scavenge. It has been since Justine, Theo's mom, showed up at our front door on the night of October 17th. She made a mistake and looked outside after sundown and didn't bleed or scream like the Salingers had. That's when we began to guess that daylight was dangerous and nighttime was safe. But we were never safe. The hushers were just watching from the darkness and waiting. When the power died and cell service went down, a group from 2 streets over set out for Waterville Valley. It's a ski resort town nearby. It should have been a short walk, but no one came back. We went through food too quickly. When we began to run low, we realized that some houses, the ones that were empty, didn't have food at all. David suspected people were hoarding, but now, I'm not so sure. 2 nights ago I went to look for food again. For something other than meat I have to warm with my body in order to cut. What I found was a number of hollow homes. They weren't just missing food. They were missing furniture, pictures, walls. The booker's house was just an open space inside, as though something had taken everything but the external structure. It used to be 2 stories. It used to have hardwood floors, but now there's only emptiness and an expanse of frozen soil. It can't be real, can it? Our home isn't much better. It's far too full in comparison. Too many places for Isla to hide. I am frightened to find her drawings now. Whenever I do, she pops out, screeches, runs at me and slams her fist into my body. It's not a punch. It's a stab. Practice for the day she decides to try it with the knife. She's my little girl. I used to push her on the swing set in the back until she learned to pump her legs. I used to hold her hand as we walked to the mom and pop's store. I used to love her, but now that love will end with blood. She's one of them. I know she is. Theo knows it too. And we're terrified. But I can't. I won't kill my little girl. So I'll wait for the blade and pray I've got to fix in me when it finally comes. Nobody, grant me the serenity of a quick death, and don't let Theo suffer when I'm gone. December 4. There's nothing in the silence but the beating of your heart, and a fear is just an echo of that rhythm in the dark. The monsters never come around. The closet's far too tight, and we will always be here if you call us in the night. David used to recite that to Isla each night. He recited it to Max before her. He wrote it, a small comfort from a loving father, a strong man who once upon a time wrote poetry for me as well. The hushers are standing in a circle around the house, dozens of them. I recognize about half of the faces, my neighbors' mothers and fathers and children, people I knew. I don't know what they want, but I finally understand why Isla called them hushers. They all screamed when I first looked outside, gaping mouths and knitted brows, but the sound that emerged was, hiss. I could hear it through the window, an impossible sound for an open mouth to make. David was among them. His quieting scream twisted in an expression of fear and pain. The strong man I knew is dead, and I am lost in a familiar place with only the memory of a bedtime poem to comfort me. December 6. I have enough heroin in the bag for 3 or 4 more days. It's enough to go to sleep and not wake up, but it doesn't make me brave. And bravery is what I need most of all right now. The bravery to find a vein on Theo so that he won't be alone when I'm gone. I have spent the past week cowering at the voice of my daughter, searching the shadows for movement as I meander a quiet house. At first I didn't want her to have to suffer through all of this, filling her belly with the flesh of a man who held her as a baby, feeling the fear that stalks behind a mother who lives in terror and sorrow. I didn't want to watch her wither from hunger. I didn't want to hold her as she died. But she died weeks ago. She died the same way the rest did, quietly consumed and digested and regurgitated as an avatar of torment. I need that to be the truth. Easy. Isla was a beautiful, funny, loving little person. Easy. Isla made me want to be good because she was perfect. Hard. Yesterday, I watched Isla sneaking around the living room as Theo read his book on the sofa where Roger died. Theo seemed nervous, wary, constantly looking up from his pages and listening for the sounds of little feet. It happened quickly. Isla was slithering across the floor on her belly. She grabbed Theo's ankle as it dangled over the sofa's edge. She said, "Good night, nobody," her voice trailing off. Isla didn't take the knife. Theo did. All I saw was a flash of steel. All I heard was Theo's shriek. I was right there, so close, but fettered by my blanket of lingering numbness. It happened quickly. There was so much blood, and Isla didn't make a sound. She wasn't my daughter. She wasn't my daughter. She wasn't my daughter. She wasn't my daughter. She wasn't. Sometimes I wonder if I am even me. December 7. I had to choose. My heart is break. This will be my final. We are small in a world that lets us believe in our own importance. We clear the land and paint it as a portrait of ourselves and think that we are artists of humanity's potential. We build our houses grand and fill them with prosperous people and coveted icons of our thin vanity. We think that we are united, the pinnacle of God's creations. We are nothing. Tonight it snowed and I fetched a shovel from the garage to bury my daughter's replacement in a shallow grave out back. The hushers snuck along the boxwoods and peered around the trunks of trees and I screamed at them. They watched my rage with the impassive silence of the dead. They watched as my shovel bit the earth and scattered snow. They watched my breath cloud the air, oblivious to the sting in my lungs and the thump in my chest. They watched as my muscles quit and I resigned myself to a half-completed task. A grave, an abrasion on the frozen ground, the best I could muster. The swings creaked, their ghostly movement a reminder of summers past and laughter hushed away into bitter memory. I wrapped Tyler in a blanket as Theo wept and apologized again and again. He was afraid. He told me how his father fought the night they arrived at our door. He told me how Roger screamed as a husher that looked like Justine tore open his leg with her bare hands and left him. He told me how the blood steamed and how he did nothing. I told him he survived and he asked me, what for? He's a smart kid. I wish he wasn't. But he was smart enough to stay inside as I carried Isla out. His house is no longer hollow. It's gone. They're all gone. Only ours remains. Good night, nobody. A warning of what was coming. I carried my bundle of blankets out back. The frost crunched beneath my feet, and then I heard it, creaking, gulping and hiss. The body fell from my arms and I ran forward. I was wrong. The Hushers didn't borrow the skin of the dead. Their Isla was wrapped in cloth. My Isla kicked and struggled before an audience of watchful quiet eyes. They had cut the ropes of our swing set, looped them, knotted them and left me with a heartbreaking choice. Isla dangled from a makeshift noose, and beside her Max grasped at the loop around his throat. They had kept my children alive so I could choose which would die, and I did choose. I grabbed Isla's legs. I held her up and watched the helpless fear settle into Max's face. I fumbled with the rope around Isla's neck and screamed for Theo to bring the knife. Isla dragged in little breaths and I watched my son stop struggling. Theo came a few moments later, hesitant in wide-eyed terror as the Hushers hushed. He was brave though. He brought the knife. I cut her down. The hushing stopped, and as I cut down Max, they all retreated into the trees. Isla was alive. I made a choice, and Max's body lay still as I pressed his chest and begged a god of false serenity for a miracle that didn't come. There is no god in this place, and if there is, we are too quiet now for him to hear us. I chose to survive for my family, and I chose to survive because survival is written in our bones. But I chose wrong. I chose my little girl because I had killed her in my mind a dozen times and saving her felt like redemption. But I chose wrong. I held her and she stared into my eyes and spoke. So long ago the forest wept, you swung the axe, our kin you kept, upon our graves, your saplings slept, but now we have odd you, and the forest grows anew. It wasn't her voice. The Isla I saved was one of them. I chose wrong. Their Isla stood, sneered and opened its mouth once more. Good night nobody. They know our thoughts. They know what will hurt, what pain a needle in a vein cannot erase. They know because they were here before us. They have seen us build and live our short little lives. They are the forest's vengeance, I think, a falling tree to crush the man that swings the axe. According to my mother, my ancestor was such a man. Perhaps I have just inherited a grudge that slowly grew and witnessed our lack of remorse. They know us. All I know now are hard truths. Hard. I was so wrong about everything. I found a blood-stained note in Max's pocket written in David's hand. Maxie, keep your sister safe. Get her home. Make sure your mom gets the bag. You've been so brave these past few days, but now you need to be brave for your family. Remember what I've taught you and Isla. Keep quiet. Make sure the Hushers don't see you. If you hear your sister scream, help. When you're scared, hide. When you're not, stab quickly and run fast. The little bag with the zipper is for mummy, but don't give it to her unless you end up outside and the sun is coming. It's medicine and she knows how to use it, but she'll lose it if it's not an emergency. And don't come looking for me. Don't. I'll find my way back when I get better. I love you, kiddo. I love all of you so much. But you need to be brave and you need to be strong for me and for them. Dad. December 8. I am writing by the light of a burning house, a pyre for the children I lacked the strength to bury. Theo is sitting next to me, watching the flames warm the bare branches above and all around us. The hush is muted by the crackle of timbers. The sofa was missing last night when I carried Isla's body back inside, as was the dining table and a dozen other small things that masquerade at making a house a home. I didn't want to wait for the walls to go, so I made a decision. It's no longer a home without them, and there is nothing for me here but the memory of death painted thickly over the rest. So when the fire dies, Theo and I will pick a direction and walk. The Hushers might follow, but I do not fear them now. How can I, when the life they would take from me burns in the fire before me? I am now only a vessel for my family. So long as I breathe life into them. I am my home now, a human memory of a little girl who drew fantastical creatures in garish beautiful colors and a boy who knew the names of all of Saturn's moons. I am a memory of a man who wrote poems and watched baseball and read bedtime stories in silly voices. I found a poem of David's behind a dresser that vanished while we slept last night. Nourish me without a thought for taste, for I have ruined my palate by your side, supped on summer days forgotten haste, and sipping liquid movements of your stride. He wrote it for me before the kids and before the dope, when we were young and he didn't have to be strong for me or anyone else. I loved him and he loved us. So that is how I will remember him. Even if his copy stalks and hushes and tears the flesh from me, I will remember whose face I knew first. It's almost time to go. The fire is less savage and more restless and I am feeling the same. I'm only bringing the essentials. I have a flashlight, this journal, a bedtime story and 2 lethal doses of heroin, drawn and ready. If we don't make it to shelter by dawn, at least we can go softly. I hope you enjoyed the story. What do you think happens next? Where did the journal come from? Is our reader destined to befall a similar fate? Let us know what you think in the comments below. As always, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, share the video with a friend, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time friends, sleep well, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome friends. In today's video, we'll hear a story, wrapped in mystery. Imagine, if you will, a man, dedicated, heroic, who served with valor. Now imagine him placed in a situation where individuals are treated without honor and dignity. We'll follow one such individual in today's story. Darkness envelops hallways in a manner where, as with all things in the realm of r/NoSleep, things are never as they seem. Before we begin, please be sure to leave us a like, share the video with a friend, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'd like to thank our current subscribers. This video is made possible by viewers like you. Now, enjoy the story. I was a security guard for an eccentric millionaire and his property. What I found while responding to an emergency one night has scarred me forever. I rented a cheap room which became my new home when I got back from Afghanistan. I slept till 1 o'clock in the afternoon most days after staying up all night. I searched online for a job and found an opening posted by the CEO of a pharmaceutical corporation. It was for the role of a security officer and personal bodyguard. The boss's name was Gregory Basile. He was wealthy, reclusive, and needed an armed night watchman. He preferred someone with military experience to keep the lookout on his place. I found Basile's official website and sent an email expressing interest. Within half a day, Basile wrote back. I went in for the interview shortly after. Basile was thin and in his mid-40s. He took me into a mini bungalow on the outskirts of his property. He conducted the interview next to a marble swimming pool. Your resume shows you're a bouncer, he said. I did a background check, Mr. Crew. You were in the Marine Corps not too long ago. Ever had a gun pulled on you? I've seen more guns than I can count overseas. I am looking for bravery. Do you have a lot of experience in surveillance? I was a sniper, I said. He hired me. I figured out that Basile was a natural hermit. I did not even see my employer most days. One time he visited me at my post, and I asked him how he spent most of his hours. Taxidermy, Basile said as he exhaled a large cloud of smoke and took a sip from his coffee cup. Crows are my specialty. Displaying them is a meditative act to me. Why crows? I asked. Crows have one eye on the spiritual realm, one eye on the real, and are a sign of affirmative creation. They are never a negative thing to see. We had many conversations like that one. Basile also told me of his obsession with films and how he owned a media production company. He yearned to rival the great Hollywood studio empires one day. He sighed and stated his hobby of taxidermy kept him busy enough. The job was effortless. I spent my shifts in a shack reading while taking in the lakefront view. After my 90-day probationary period ended, he handed me the key to his house and gave me one rule. Basile said I could not enter his mansion unless he called me with news of an emergency. Basile's house was old. It used to belong to someone related to the man who invented the sewing machine. For years it was on the market after its original owner died. Everybody who lived in the estate left it behind except for Basile. I did not always enjoy the night shift. I would always hear a screaming voice from the top floor, and a light in the window of the attic would flicker on and off. I did not know why. and Mr. Basile did not know either when I questioned him about it later the next day. I asked him if I was the only employee who worked for him on the property. As it turns out, I was the only one on his payroll. I asked him if he had any night terrors, and he got ready to fire me on the spot. I apologized and told him I did not mean to pry and that it was a regular occurrence for me. I reassured him my question did not come from a place of judgment. I mused on how it would explain the loud yelling which always happened past midnight. During another time while working the graveyard shift, I stepped out of the shack to get some fresh air. I looked up and saw yellow lights flicker on and off from the topmost room through the haze of tobacco vapor. A loud scream followed and did not stop. I sprinted through the front field. It had broken down statues and pathways aligned with candles encased in blue glass. I reached one of the gates clogged with vines. I grabbed a hold of one and began climbing it. I approached a northern barricade made of black and twisted metal. It was frost-laden to the touch, but with leather gloves on I got a solid grip. I placed my feet into the crevices of the ancient mythological designs carved into the wall. I heaved myself up 10 feet of it before looking over the other side. I inhaled the scent of maplewood and watered grass lifted by the breeze. I pulled myself upwards next to a large oak tree. For a quick second, there appeared to be movement on one of the top floors. I focused on it and saw it was a mechanical co-track on wheels. Their garments fluttered in the wind. I chose not to risk climbing the varied sets of bastions and arching rooftops. There was a long concrete path which led to a weathered fountain with cracked alabaster. Statues of gargoyles circled it. I attempted to scale the backside of the wall, placing one foot over the ledge with steady balance. The landing of the second foot on the other side of the wall when I reached it was not as good. My lower body dangled. I kicked the wall in an attempt to find some kind of bearing without any luck. I fell off. Something solid stopped my fall mid-center of my back and threw me upwards again. I turned over to see that I had landed in a tree. A thick but pliable branch softened my fall. I hung there for a minute before working up the nerve to let go. I landed on the dewy green turf 8 feet below. I ducked behind a row of trimmed hedges and followed it. I went to the front door made from ivory stone. I tried to use the master key to open it without success. I found a window leading down to a basement. I pushed it to see if the latch on the other side was keeping it in place. And my suspicion proved correct. Walking over a few feet to an area with a dead miniature garden, I picked up a rock and began smashing at the pane. When it shattered, I swept away some of the sharp flakes and crawled into the basement. I looked around before reaching for the flashlight at my side in its holder on my belt. I illuminated the area. I thought I saw a human face. Upon closer inspection I learned it was a mannequin. With each step, all I could see were the wax figurines, male and female. Their mouths were agape or their eyes closed, some disfigured or melted or painted. Illustrations of demonic faces covered their expressions. One of the figurines was metallic with black lines resembling human veins. Another line of them had different types of grey stocking caps. The hats covered up single braids which flowed downwards. Some had clown faces with elongated red lipstick, and purplish eyeliner. Hacked and melted dummy parts were on the floor. I searched the quarter for any and every secret I could. There were no closets. I felt the walls looking for a doorknob. I walked up a spiral staircase towards the next room. That chamber was especially small, and the floor sapphire-colored. There was a scattered miscellany of strange devices. There were telescopes facing the windows. Pendulum clocks built out of fossil hung on crooked shelves. Geometrical military compasses hung nailed to the wall. One segment of the area was nothing but thin strings. I pulled on one out of sheer curiosity, which led to several of the other twines bending. A cascade of puppets fell from the ceiling. A jester, king, witch, archangel, grim reaper, and hangman. They all flew down from the top, their paper outlines emphasized in the bright gloss of the room. Their crowns, brooms, death masks, and nooses swayed against each other as they landed into one another mid-air. One of the mantelpieces contained a line of palm-sized 100 Years War-type cannons. The idea of using a lit match to see if they shot pellets seemed like a good one. Before I decided otherwise, the overstuffed space was pressing in on me. I used a door beside a globe to enter the next corridor. This one was more bizarre than the last. For a second I felt like jumping out the window to get out of the infernal place. I began investigating what the contents in the room actually meant. It was a film set. There were masks of all kinds. Marine knives were in the darkness of that clearance. I touched the edge of one to see if it was real or fake, and I proved them to be authentic. I looked at one of the corners and found a half-empty tin canister of a burnt-looking film reel. There was a projector next to it. Across from that equipment, there was a tank full of what I hoped was nothing more than artificial blood. I pressed my hand against the glass. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of this thing and noticed a button at the bottom of the large glass edifice. A velvet polluted stream of fluid began flowing out. At first it splashed my legs. I soon slipped and fell. I slid backwards, carried by a river of crimson. The fake blood drifted me against the other edge of the room. I smashed through the cathedral-like window and plummeted downwards. I landed on the right side of my body, hoping there was no fracture. I stood and felt little more than some discomfort. I had suffered worse injuries in boot camp. I was in the main foyer of the house, and marveled at how elegant it was. It was Victorian yet machine-like. There were 2 flights of black rock steps leading up to a new set of bedrooms. There was a giant mural between the 2 staircases. It was a portrait of a female's corpse stenciled out on the ground in clean white chalk. On either side of her outline were childlike drawings of trees. I smelled my hand to see if the red fluid was blood. The iron copper stench was not there, but instead one of corn syrup and food dye. I walked up the flight of steps to the left and entered another chamber. It was a computer room. A tuxedo was in a glass case against the right wall. It was discarded movie memorabilia from one of the former actors on the set. The place across the way had nothing in it except one golden wall with a sunset painted on it. The carpet was a midnight blue. There was a row of candles along a foreign rug like it was a spiritual shrine. I looked around and saw one fake scroll which was blank and held together with a clean-looking red ribbon. I closed the doorway and moved on. There were 3 other chambers accessible from the main hall that I had fallen into. One was a dark room for photography, although no pictures were in it. The place glowed red. The second was a room with pictures of classic cars from the 40s and 50s. 2 portraits hung in the center. One was of Elvis Presley, the second was of the serial killer Charlie Starkweather. The third room was the most normal. 2 bookshelves held nothing but seedy, sensationalist titles. I used the emergency master key to gain access to entryways leading up to the top floor. I discovered that it worked on most of the interior passageways. I passed rows of stuffed Saharan animals. A smell of carbolic acid and spoiled meat greeted me. On the second and third floor, I began noticing a trend in the taxidermy collection. Crows were all around. Their eyes were missing, their beaks warped, and their feathers blocked. I was soon in the attic. There was a set of eyes staring at me, and a door with the silhouette of a black skull painted on it. I opened the door and saw a circle of dark candles. The next foyer had stuffed wolves, foxes, lions, and leopards. I ran up the limestone staircase leading to the second level. I found the entrance on the ceiling, pulled it down and entered the attic. It was dusty and lined with columns of boxes. The place was in the shape of a triangle. Near the pointed end was another chamber closed off with an old oak door. Next to it was a skull, and 2 bright amber dots in the place where the eyes should have been. I thought they were insects of some kind, fireflies or glowworms. I got closer to them and observed how they were not moving. I heard the scream again. I busted down the door with a kick. In front of me was a circle of black candles. Half of them were lit. What I saw on the other side makes me weep whenever I remember it. It was a sergeant I had served with, though he and I were not close or in the same unit. I recognized and knew of his reputation. His name was James Mantle. He was a prolific hunter of insurgents in the Alishan district of the Lagan province. He was dead and had been for a long while. Someone mounted Mantle on the wall. His arms were folded across his chest in the same sacred way bodies are in open casket ceremonies. My mind began racing. Someone had to have desecrated his body in bringing him there. I scoured the room. I moved some of the old clutter. I found paper bags with decapitated heads cleaned of blood. There was also a functioning ceiling light pull fashioned from flesh. Crushed and shriveled roses were on the ground to mask the scent. I found a journal bound in skin. The writing was calligraphic. I sat in the dark and shined my pen light on its pages. It was a grimoire. The pages evolved into a host of different spellcasting instructions. The lengthiest enchantment was for everlasting bravery. The requirements were 4 things: a full moon, a circle of black candles, a chalice of water with added salt, and 2 spoonfuls of vervain. Stir the contents with a wedge of wood, the directions instructed, and pour the concoction over the cadaver of a brave warrior. The writer was Basile. He had a sick delusion of performing feats of necromancy meant to chase away his own cowardice. The spell required equal parts the lifelessness and preservation of someone valiant. There was a page describing how Basile had ordained the body of the man from Calderon Cemetery. He bribed the groundskeeper with enough money to make the sentinels look the other way. Basile stole the valor of departed veterans. Anger coursed through me. I stood up and stuffed the journal on the inside pocket of my jacket, turning around to look at my friend once more. Then, I heard the shuffling of feet down the hallway to my right. I drew my gun and scaled the wall after walking outside. Before coming to another threshold, I gazed around the corner while making as little noise as possible, and I saw Basile. The old man had a row of dead crows on a silvery metallic board. Next to him was a voluminous countertop. There was a row of pin pushers, bone cutters, scissor forceps, and combination tools. Many black feathers were at his feet. I aimed the gun at him while approaching. Basile saw me and his eyes widened. He knocked his counter over, chucking a knife at me. The blade missed and clattered to the ground. I squeezed the trigger, and the bullet hit Basile in the right shoulder. He grunted in pain, hit the earth, and soon regained balance. He ran and I tackled him. I looked into his eyes. "Please no," he said. "No, no, no, no." I put the barrel to his forehead and squeezed the trigger. I was on a leaf-strewn mound overlooking Calderon Cemetery. I was in full camouflage. I sat between 2 species of Zelkova trees underneath the branches. I held my M16A4 rifle with its Picatinny rail and foregrip. I peered through its scope at the sentinel and groundskeeper. They were the ones who had allowed Basile to disrespect the dead for the sake of profit and necromancy. The muzzle compensator managed the recoil and allowed for a faster follow-on shot. Both of the graveyard workers fell to the ground. I slung the strap of the rifle over my back, went to my truck, and retrieved Mantle. I balanced him over my shoulder and carried him to his original place of burial. I shoveled the already soft soil to the side. I finally came across the pall laying over the hexagonal coffin. I removed the cloth. The exterior shell was already damaged, but I treated it as if it were new. I placed my friend in the coffin and proceeded to rebury. On the drive back to my old apartment, I called the police. I gave them the address of the mansion and told the 9.1.1 operator about the location of the estate and what was contained in its topmost parts. It will be a while before they find Basile and the condition he is in, but they will. When they get me, so be it. I will never regret what I did. Semper Fidelis. End. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let us know what you thought in the comments below. Can you relate to the man in our story? Do you believe his actions were justified? What would you do if you saw something similar? As always, please be sure to smash that like button, share the video with a friend, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, sleep well friends, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome friends. In today's video we'll hear the story of a family unfold. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters. A family unit can be an incredibly close bond. It can also be a frightful thing for some. The closeness that a family shares can be a source of strife and pain as well. Differences in a home can lead to turmoil that bubbles under the surface until it explodes. Today we'll hear the story of one such family. Bonds that are strong, but stretched thin with tension. As with all our stories from r/NoSleep, things are never as they seem. Join us as we uncover the truth. Before we get started, please be sure to smash that like button, make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. I'd like to thank all of our subscribers. This channel is made possible by viewers like you. Now, enjoy the story. I'm glad my dad drowned. Growing up, I really hated frogs. And I mean, I seriously despised the slimy little bastards. You probably would too, if everybody said you looked like one. At school, the cruel jokes never stopped. Kids would follow me around going ribbit and worm the word a croak into every other sentence. Then one morning, as I shoulder charged my way along a busy corridor, an older boy took one look at me and said, "Hey Kermit." Even the principal laughed, and so, from that day forth, I was known only as Kermit. Now what made these frog-related taunts especially ironic was the fact my mom looked like a fairy tale princess. She had long dark hair that draped past her shoulders and striking green eyes. Anytime she came within a half-mile of the school, my classmates would all say, "Your mom's a total babe, Kermit." Thinking about her now, some 2 decades later, still gets me choked up. Unfortunately, my daughter's reached the age where she's become a mini KGB officer. Her non-stop questions are, mostly, a rapid-fire barrage of harmless nonsense. Have you ever ridden a hot air balloon, Daddy? What's your favorite color, hamster? But every so often, she'll ask an especially tricky one, like what's wrong with your hands? Or, how come I've only got 2 grandparents? For years I've danced around the story of how my family fell apart, but now seems as good a time as any to dredge up some bad memories. See, when I was a boy, my mum took me on these treasure hunts. We'd traipse up and down the beach behind our cottage, through stinking seaweed and crab shells. And all the while, she'd hum this soft little tune. Dee, dee dee, Dundee dee. When I asked Mom what she hoped to find out there, she'd say she couldn't really remember, only that it was big and grey. But lots of things are big and grey, I said. How would we know we found the right one? She closed her eyes, her expression all wistful. Because it'll feel wet and slimy. And so, without actually knowing what to search for, we rummaged through broken bottles, kelp, rusted Coke cans, and whatever else washed up on shore. Dad never joined these hunts. He spent his days out on boats and his nights drinking in a little pub called the Harbour Inn, where he'd show off pictures of Mum and say, "Quite a catch, huh?" Most nights he'd stagger home, completely pissed, sometime after 2 a.m., stinking of both fish guts and whiskey. Every so often he'd insist Mom go find a job to help earn some money, even though things never ended well. Because of her terrible memory, Mom either forgot to turn off an oven or return from her lunch break on time. She couldn't stomach criticism, either. Sooner or later, a coworker would remark about how she styled her hair or wore her makeup. Then she'd quit on the spot. Given her bullheadedness and the general effect she had on men, I never understood why she stayed with Dad. There was plenty of fish in the sea, after all, and he treated her like something stuck to the bottom of his boot. She wasn't exactly short of suitors, either. During our treasure hunts, countless guys invented flimsy excuses to chat her up. On Saturdays, my old man made me join him on fishing expeditions so he could teach me how to properly navigate waves. The 2 of us went out on this little rowboat with our fishing poles, and anytime I made a catch he'd thump my back hard and say, "You're a chip off the old block." Although only in his 30s, a hard upbringing meant Dad looked much older. He also stood taller and broader than any other person in our sleepy village. A few miles off the coast, there was this tiny island, and every time we rowed past, Dad would point to this crude pile of rocks in the center and say, "I built that memorial for your grandfather." Then he'd inevitably recount the story of how one day, while out fishing, a storm erupted out of nowhere, tossing him, his father, and their crewmates around until an especially violent wave made the ship's stroller snap. It whipped right around and took Grandpa's left leg clean off. We made for that island and tried to clamp his wound, Dad would say, fighting back emotion. But it was already too late. My old man insisted I'd become a great fisherman someday. But secretly, I hated fishing. Almost as much as frogs. I hated the awkward motion of the boat. I hated the salty sea air. I hated that chafing wind that turned your cheeks red. And above all, I hated the noisy gulls, who always sounded like they were laughing. Those cackles reminded me of the kids at school. One evening, at the dinner table, I worked up the nerve to say all this. "What are you talking about?" Dad slammed his fist against the table hard enough to make the plates rattle and bounce. "Well, a broken bar fishing's boring and it makes your clothes all stinky." Mom shot me a look, silently advising I drop the subject. It was too late for that, though. "And you're away all the time," I said to Dad. "If it wasn't for our lessons, I don't think I'd remember what you look like." Without warning, he reached over and gave my wrist a sudden tug. I got pinned against the table, the whole right side of my face buried in the mountain of mashed potatoes. While I pleaded for help and struggled to break free, Mum jumped up and furiously pried Dad off my arm. "Enough," she shouted. "He doesn't know what he's saying." As suddenly as Dad's rage appeared, it evaporated. He released my arm and said, "We'll talk about this later." Then he grabbed his coat and stormed off, presumably to the harbor inn. Warm gravy ran down my chin and dripped onto the floor. Alone with Mum, I said, "Sorry I made him mad, Mommy." She gestured for me to sit on her lap, cradled me into her chest like a teddy bear, and then picked lumps of potato out of my hair. "That's okay, darling. It's not your fault." Sometimes after midnight, a fierce argument erupted downstairs. I tiptoed to the top of the staircase to listen in. After a few minutes of stomping around the ground floor, my father's voice grew louder and angrier until there was a sudden thump. Everything went quiet after that. The next morning, Mum had an ugly purple bruise beneath her left eye. That summer, the two of us went treasure hunting almost every day. The second my eyes opened, I'd rush into her room to remind her it was time to go. Otherwise, it would completely slip her mind. Around July time she began to suspect her lost thing wasn't actually on the beach. So we searched the village and surrounding hills, constantly on the lookout for something big and grey. "Why would what you lost be all the way out here?" I asked one afternoon, as we picnicked on a grassy knoll overlooking the coast. "When I lose my marbles, they're always close by, like in my sock or under my bed." I bit into my fruits gone while Mom nibbled on her tuna sandwich. "Because your father's a very sneaky man," she replied, matter-of-factly. When I screwed up my face, she sighed and said, "You see, darling, I always thought I'd lost my precious thing. 11 years ago I met your father, and we had a lot of fun together. It was never meant to be long-term, and I certainly didn't like the idea of cooking and cleaning for anyone, but one day I woke up and my precious thing was gone. Without it, I couldn't leave. So I stuck around, expecting it'd turn up sooner or later. Then before I knew it you came along." She gave my cheek a quick peck. "But that night you made him angry. He came home drunk, and we got into a huge row. Well, one thing led to another and he let slip that he's stolen what I thought I'd lost. After all these years, to discover what he'd done, I slapped him so hard it left a mark. Then he grabbed me by the neck and threw me against the wall. The next morning, his hangover was so bad he forgot about what happened. Unsure how to respond, I simply said, "I'm sorry, Mommy." "That's okay, darling. But unless I find what I lost, my memory's only going to get worse. Then we better find it fast." That made her smile. The two of us off after gathering our things, her humming that soft tune, dee dee dee, Dundee dee. She made me promise not to repeat any of this to Dad. but at that age, what kid's any good at keeping secrets? The next time he took me fishing, he picked up on my quiet demeanor. "What's the matter with you?" "Nothing," I replied, keeping my eyes glued to the waves. The moment one of his giant hands clamped over my shoulder, a confession practically spewed out. My heart thudded wildly against my chest as it did. Dad may have been an expert fisherman, but he lacked the temperament for fatherhood, and Mom wasn't around to cool his temper. At that moment, it occurred to me she maybe only stayed with Dad so I wouldn't have to fend for myself. The wind died and the waves calmed while both of us sat in utter silence. Eventually, he said, "You did the right thing by telling me." Already there were tears in my eyes, no doubt because of my own sense of shame. I wiped them away and said, "Maybe if you gave back what you stole, Mummy would be so grateful she'd forgive you, and then she'd stop forgetting things. This thing your mum's looking for, if she found it, she'd disappear forever, and you'd never, ever see her again." There was a stern warning in his voice. She'd disappear, son. You don't want that to happen, do you? Saying nothing, I bit my bottom lip and shook my head. Good. He stared off into the horizon. In any case, you needn't worry. That stupid woman could pull the village apart brick by brick and never find what she's looking for. On our next treasure hunt, I kept my lip buttoned about what Dad said. Me and Mum were having so much fun together, the thought of her leaving made me nauseous, and the idea of living with Pops, no mediator around to cool his temper, absolutely terrified me. In the summer of '99, as Mum and I strolled out of the theater after watching Star Wars, she forgot the entire movie before we'd even crossed the lobby. Her memory had never been that bad before. It was only the beginning. Over the next few weeks, she'd nip out to buy groceries and get lost on the way home, or need to spend a full minute concentrating extra hard just to remember my name. Since Dad had me to keep her out of trouble, he stayed largely ignorant of all this, although the way she constantly trailed off mid-sentence quickly wore down his patience. Glass bottles started flying in my direction anytime she lost her train of thought. One afternoon, as Mum sat on a stool in our back garden and stared at the ocean waves, I clasped her hand and said, "Is everything okay, Mommy?" She reared up in her seat, her face terribly pale. "Oh, it's you." "Yes, sweetheart, I think so." She let out a deep sigh, that flicker of recognition already fading. At that moment it became painfully clear we couldn't carry on like this. If we did, Mom would wither away. There was no choice other than to help her, whatever the consequences. I pulled her to her feet. "Come on, let's go." "Where to?" she asked, letting me lead her around like an eager puppy. "On a treasure hunt." I pushed my old man's rowboat into the ocean, letting it bob on the back of a few limp waves until we were deep enough to start paddling. For once, I found myself grateful Dad made me take all those dumb lessons. At Grandpa's Island, I jumped into the waist-deep water, my toes going numb in an instant, and marooned the boat on a beach of pebbles. I'd secretly known Dad's hiding spot for a while. The island was really just a big rock, and in the center lay Grandpa's memorial, a crude pyramid of smaller rocks. My fleece became a damp rag against my back as I pulled the structure apart, piece by piece. Nearby, Mom sat in a dreamlike state. After lifting away an especially slippery, moss-covered stone, I saw something poking out from underneath, a burlap sack, so badly rotted there was a hole in the side. The beginnings of a grey object poked through. "Mom, I think I found it," I shouted, practically jumping up and down. The thing inside the sack had the consistency of pickled eggs and carried a damp, fungal scent. "Mum." I held her shoulders so she had to face me. Her eyes stared off over my shoulder, toward the yellow and orange horizon. I cupped my eyes, squinted into the distance, and saw there was a boat sailing straight toward us. It was Dad. He'd likely arrived home, discovered his rowboat missing, and put two and two together. I had to act fast. Pulling down the rest of the structure was bitter work. Soon there were blood blisters all over my hands. After tossing aside the final rock, I hoisted the sack onto my shoulder with a loud grunt and said, "Mom, I found it." "Look." She sat motionless, as though hypnotized by a stage magician. I had no idea what her lost thing was or how it might help. Plus now Dad was less than a few minutes away. When he got his hands on me, he'd be furious. So furious he might have to build another memorial. We had to set sail. Hopefully, Mom would become lucid again before Dad caught up. I guided her into the boat and lay the sack across her lap, but before we could even cast off, Dad marooned his boat, jumped into the water, and grabbed our stern, holding us in place. "Give that to me," he demanded. "No," I said, angrily. "Mum's sick." "She's sick, and this'll help her feel better." "It won't make her better, it'll make her leave." "Is that what you want?" "Better she leaves than stays like this." He clenched his jaw and stuck me in the left temple, which knocked me onto the wooden boards. I rolled from side to side, clutching my burning eye socket. At that moment, Dad was prepared to kill me. Better his family passed away in a freak boating accident than abandon him for being an asshole, right? The violent action snapped Mum out of her daze. She fumbled for words. "Who said that? What happened? Where?" As her eyes flicked between me, Dad, and the thing on her lap, the realization hit her like a lightning bolt. Dad tried to snatch her object away, but Mum held on tight and went along with it. The rotted sack practically disintegrated as the two of them wrestled around. Then the thing inside fell out and slumped over the bow. Whatever it was kinda looked like a wetsuit. Dad seized Mom's wrists before she could scoop it up. Still feeling every heartbeat along the left side of my face, I fumbled around, grabbed a paddle, bounced up, and then brought the end down across the back of Dad's head. His upper torso sprawled forward, into the boat, rubbing the swollen goose egg already forming around the back of his skull. He straightened up, pupils badly dilated. Before he could lunge at Mom a second time, I threw myself between them and held out the paddle like a shield while she fumbled around. With barely any effort, Dad wrestled away my oar, the boat tipping wildly to the port side. Salt water splashed over all three of us as he repeatedly struck me in the face, and then stars danced in front of my eyes. I vaguely remember lying flat on my back, a river of blood spewing from my nostrils, and watching a hazy, upside-down Mom slide the wetsuit thing up her legs and torso. It made a noise like dog food escaping from a tin. Dad made one final, desperate attempt to stop her by leaping forward, arms outstretched. The sudden shift in weight rocked the boat, almost to the point of tipping to the starboard side, but then both my parents plummeted overboard. The vessel quickly rebalanced, taking on a little water. A column of white foam hissed into the air. It was followed by a sharp yelp, then gurgles. I rolled onto my stomach and peeked over the side, just in time to watch a stream of bubbles disappear. Quickly the water turned light pink, then a grey skull, capped by a single dorsal fin, appeared beneath the surface. As two webbed hands reached out of the water and wrapped around the side of the boat, I scrambled away, fumbling wildly for a paddle or a rock, for anything to defend myself with. Directly in front of me, a sea creature hoisted itself into view. The humanoid beast had fish-like scales, seaweed-colored hair straggling from the top of a wet skull, and deep, green eyes. The creature's mouth widened, revealing countless rows of serrated teeth. It slowly raised a webbed hand, identical to mine in all ways except color, and then it made a series of liquid gurgles. Those sounds followed a simple pattern. D, 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 Dundee D. I studied my hands. My stupid, ugly, webbed hands, the same ones that earned me the nickname Kermit. And as I gazed into the creature's eyes, those familiar green eyes, it became clear who exactly I was gazing at. Mum, in the years since that fateful day, I'd learned all about Selkies, a sea folk capable of shedding their skin to transform into beautiful women. Pop down to the local library, and you'll find countless fairy tales about cruel men stealing Selkies' skin to coerce them to stay on land and have children. Ones who can be identified by their webbed hands. But Selkies aren't meant to live on land, not permanently. At least, they either return to the sea or slowly wither away, like my mother. There is, however, one part the old stories always get wrong. They say once Selkies return to the ocean, their families never see them again. Today marks the 23rd anniversary of my mom recovering her skin, and every year, at Grandpa's Island, she emerges from the ocean, transforms back into a human, and we have ourselves a family reunion. I told everyone my parents drowned that day. But this year, my daughter's finally old enough to know the truth about my mom, about the Selkies. This year, she finally gets to meet her grandmother. I hope you enjoyed the video. What did you think? Can you relate to the interpersonal strife? Family life can certainly have its ups and downs. How do you get on with your family? Does this story remind you of any of your own life experiences? If so, let us know in the comments below. Thank you for staying until the end of the video. As always, be sure to leave us a like, share the video with a friend, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time, sleep well friends, and thank you for tuning in. Welcome friends. In today's video we'll hear a story that will chill you to your bones. I'm sure most of you enjoy traveling. Have you ever planned a dream vacation? If so, where did you go? I'm sure it had its ups and downs. However, in today's tale from r/NoSleep we'll hear about a dream vacation turned on its head. Sometimes even the most perfectly planned trip can end unexpectedly. Today, hear the story of 4 friends and the trip that took them deep into the heart of Japan. Warning: today's story contains instances of self-harm. This work is fiction. Relations to places and people may be purely coincidental. Viewer discretion is advised. If you or anyone you know is having these kinds of thoughts, please seek help from a medical professional. Links in the description below. Now, enjoy the story. We went on a vacation to Japan. I wish we never did. If you're planning to go on a vacation soon, please read this story. We made a mistake of trying to be adventurous and it cost more than we thought it ever would. My name is Liam, I'm 18 years old. I worked part-time jobs ever since I got into high school to be able to afford a vacation before going to college. The reason I wanted to do this was because, once I left for college, I'd be either stuck in my room studying, or going to low-budget college parties, neither of which sounded great. 3 of my best friends from high school also had the same idea. A small Asian guy named Seth. His parents immigrated to America from Japan. One of the friends I never thought I would have, Sarah. She was a Caucasian daddy's girl. She was spoiled and always got what she wanted. And a tall black guy named JJ who was chill and loved to crack jokes to make people laugh. The 4 of us decided we wanted to go on a vacation together. It would cost us less and we could spend more time with Yakutha before we went our separate ways. We were thinking of where to go when Seth suggested we should go to Japan. You're always talking about how you would love to see Japan, so why not go there? I'm sure my parents would love it too if I visited Japan, he said, smile on his face. He always wanted to impress his parents, but he was right. We did want to visit Japan and he would help us navigate because he could still speak Japanese. We all agreed and after we graduated we booked tickets for a flight to Japan on Friday morning. We spent next couple of days packing up our stuff and JJ said he had some camping equipment we can take there in case we decide to go camping. When Friday morning came we were all waiting in the airport, excited to go on a vacation and explore. After a while we got on a plane and the flight went smoothly. I was asleep for most of it. We landed in Kyoto and went to a hotel so that we can get ourselves rooms. We spent the rest of the day exploring the city and trying different street foods and before we knew it, it was time for us to get back to our hotel rooms and call it a night. Next day we woke up feeling refreshed and ready for a next day of exploration. We were at one of the street food vendors that sold dango when we decided to ask if there were any interesting locations for camping. He said that there was a forest known for people committing suicide in it. The name was Okigahara, but he told us we weren't allowed to camp in there, only visit for tours. Being dumb and adventurous teenagers that we were, we decided we'd go the camping. Not our first time breaking the rules, and we would find a nice secluded spot in there so that no one would bother us or even know we were there. Seth was against the idea at first, saying how we should respect the dead and not do what we were not supposed to, but he quickly agreed after he saw that we were not letting that opportunity go. We rented a car, bought some booze, fire starting kit and a survival knife in case anything attacked us. As the evening came, we started making our way to the forest. The drive took about 40 minutes, so it wasn't too bad. We had a lot to talk about. We got there as it started getting dark, and we quickly made a fire and set up our tents in which we were going to sleep. Next couple of hours we spent talking and drinking and generally having fun. We shared scary stories we came upon in our life, and soon the time came for us to go to bed. We put out the fire and I got into my sleeping bag and dozed off. I woke up in the middle of the night. As I rubbed my eyes, I decided to see what time it was. The clock read 2:48 a.m. and I realized I needed to pee really badly. As I left my tent and made my way a bit deeper into the woods, I thought I saw a figure of a person, but as I blinked again it was gone. I shrugged it off as me being hangover and just seeing things. I finished my business and made my way back to the tent. I fell and once again I was awoken, but this time I could hear something. It sounded like a muffled voice speaking in Japanese. Thinking it was Seth speaking with a park ranger or something, I got out of my tent and I could see Seth at the edge of the forest. Based on his posture I figured he wasn't peeing, so I thought he may have been sleepwalking. As I approached him the voice became more loud and clear, indicating that it was indeed Seth speaking. "Hey man, what are you up to?" I asked, expecting him to either not answer because he was sleepwalking or be embarrassed that I caught him talking to himself in the middle of the night. Seth did stop speaking, but he didn't turn in my direction. He was looking out into the woods, not saying anything. As I moved few steps forward, he turned towards me in a speed I never thought was possible. He jerked his hands a bit, which were placed on the left side of his abdomen, as he let out a groan. "Are you okay?" I said, moving towards him. That's when I noticed what he was actually doing. He plunged our survival knife deep into his abdomen. He looked at me with a satisfying expression as he slid the knife horizontally across his abdomen. I was frozen in fear, standing still as my friend bled out in front of me. After I gained some control of my body, I screamed. My lungs burned as I screamed again and again. JJ and Sarah woke up to see what was happening, and once they saw Seth, they too screamed at the top of their lungs. "We need to get the fuck out of here," I said as I ran back to our camp to pack our stuff up. Not even 10 seconds into the packing I could hear JJ scream, "No, Sarah. Where the fuck are you going?" he yelled, and as I turned my head I could see Sarah running into the woods. "Fuck, we need to go after her. We can't leave her in this forest alone," I exclaimed, nodding my head to the direction in which she ran. JJ just nodded his head as we ran after her, adrenaline pumping in our veins. We ran like that for 5 minutes until we saw Sarah climbing a tree, already almost at the top. "Sarah, get down, please. You don't want to do this," I said with worry and panic enveloping me. As she climbed the tree she looked at me and JJ once again with a smile and a look of satisfaction on her face as she let herself fall down on top of her head. The sound of bones snapping as her body fell limp and lifeless. We didn't say anything, we simply looked at the ground for 5 minutes. 10 minutes, I'm not even sure how long. We just sat there, our gaze meeting the ground beneath us. As we were looking down, JJ pulled out a knife which was already covered with Seth's blood. I didn't even try to stop him. No, I was waiting for him to do it so I can have my turn. Just as he was about to pierce his abdomen, a figure emerged from the bushes next to us and shoved JJ, who in turn dropped his knife. The man said something in Japanese as he picked JJ up and made a gesture for us to follow him. And we did. We followed him back to what we assumed was his house. He made us some tea as he started to speak. How many have passed? The man said bluntly. Me and JJ looked at Agatha as we said two in unison. This forest makes people want to end their lives. It's not known for suicides for no reason. Every time someone spends more than 6 hours in the forest makes them commit suicide. He paused, meeting our gaze to make sure we were still listening. The reason it does this is because there was a tribe living the hundreds of years ago. After they were defeated and about to be wiped out, their shaman put a curse on the forest, making anyone who stayed there for a prolonged periods of time end their own life. He said as me and JJ looked at Agatha and finished our tea. I suggest you leave now. Leave to wherever you came from and don't come back, he said as he got us back to town. It was already dawn at this point. When we got back, me and JJ packed our stuff, got a refund from the hotel for the next 2 nights and got on a flight back home. We didn't dare say a word to the police. We didn't want to stay in that cursed place any longer. 2 weeks have passed since that incident and I just got news that JJ committed suicide. As I'm sitting here about to post this, with a gun in my right hand, it doesn't seem like such a bad idea. I hope you enjoyed the story. What do you think happens next? Is the narrator doomed to befall a similar fate? Let us know in the comments below. Have you ever been on a vacation that ended badly? Tell us about it. As always, be sure to like, share, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss an installment of Redditor Reports. Until next time, sleep well my friends and thank you for tuning in. Welcome friends. Today's story is shrouded in darkness, a nighttime escapade of intrigue and horror. Have you ever been involved in an automobile accident? The squealing of tires, the crunching of metal and the rush of adrenaline can leave the memory a blur. Today's story revolves around one such incident. However, in the realm of r/NoSleep, things are never as they seem. Join us as we dive deep into another riveting tale. Roadkill. Ricky knew I was having trouble putting food on the table, so he called me up to say there's some roadkill down the way just past the bridge. No shame in it. This is a big boy, Ricky said. Enough meat to really fill up your freezer. It was just a few days before the start of deer season. The woods were overflowing not just with animals but also pollen, insect noise, ghosts. You never knew what you could find on the side of the road. I asked Ricky how long he figured the roadkill had been there. Well, he said, seeing as I'm the one hit it, about 10 minutes ago. So why not take it yourself? I asked. Because I'm coming back from the dice and figured I'd not test my luck by adding another crime on top of that, Ricky said. The dice was the dice roll, the pub across town by the river, which meant Ricky was out on a drunk again, driving the back roads. A big cadaver in his truck bed might draw some unwanted attention, especially with the Department of Transportation's laws against harvesting roadkill. Shot or run over, it made no difference. This time of year, no matter what kind of cadaver you had in your truck bed, it would land you on the wrong side of the law. Rest of my truck is banged all to hell anyway. This sucker was so big, Ricky said, cracked my whole damn windshield. You just leave it there in the road for someone to run over? Nah, dragged it off into the bushes as best I could. But you should be able to get out and find it easy enough if you pull over by the big tree. You know the one. I did. Sure enough, I was in my tool shed when Ricky called, near 1 a.m. So my wife and kids were asleep in bed. But I knew the route in and out of the woods that the late-nighters took to avoid the law. It wasn't unusual for me to be awake at this hour. Ricky knew I could never sleep much anymore. We were the same like that. You tell me what you want to do, he said over the phone. Otherwise, I'll call somebody else to go pick it up off the road. No, I said. I want it. Alright then. Call if you need anything else. Just make sure you delete me from your call history once we hang up. Ricky, since when am I a fool? Just making sure, he said. "You've been a good and godly family man for a while now. Didn't know if you'd forgotten." "I remember everything," I told him. You wouldn't guess how hard it is on the spirit, how deep the fear, to know that if you make one small mistake in your life, one small offense, everything you love can be taken from you. On that night Ricky called me about the roadkill he'd hit. I'd been up late building furniture in my shed. I'd been doing that a while now to bring in some extra cash. Ricky and I had once been partners, before doing some time together at Life's Correctional Institution about 5 years earlier for some bad things I'd rather not discuss. But the result was that even when folks were begging people to come back to work, they never wanted a felon like me. 5 years, 1 month, and 3 days I'd been on parole, as of that night. Too long, no doubt, but given the multitude of other sins they could have gotten me for, I tried taking it as a blessing. Yet I knew I was living with an axe over my head. Sarah, my wife, had seen past my shortcomings when I'd met her at the Methodist church a few months after I'd gotten out, and we'd since gone on to build a life together. Our son, Jacob, was 4. Our daughter, Abigail, had just turned 2. Sarah worked all day as a home health aide, and I watched over the kids while trying to find part-time work, scavenging whatever meager job I could find. Ricky, my old partner, had taken a different path. It was always late at night when he called. We weren't supposed to contact one another, on court order. That never stopped me from picking up. The roadkill was not far. I got in my truck and kept the headlights off as I eased out of the curved dirt driveway, making sure to wait until I'd passed by our neighbors' shacks and had reached the main road before I flipped them on. These were wooded roads. They terrified me in ways most people wouldn't understand. My headlamps swashed over twisted tree branches and overhanging leaves and sagging power lines. Even the main road was empty this late. Only one other car passed me by as I drove the 5 miles or so to the crossroads under the bridge, where Ricky had dragged the roadkill into the bushes. Right away I saw he'd been sloppy. Part of his truck's grill lay in the road, glinting like river gold in my headlamps. I pulled over and cut the engine. When I stepped out into the night air, the fragrance of the woods confronted me, these earthy damp smells that were more memory than sense. All the nights Ricky and I had hidden things in the woods now layered over one another in my mind as I walked over to pick the chunk of his grill out of the road. We'd hidden so much out here, so close to our homes. It was starting to change me, or maybe it already had and I was only just noticing. Once, a few months earlier, my wife Sarah had asked me why I kept the windows rolled up when I drove down these roads on cool spring nights. Wouldn't it be nicer, she'd said, to let the fresh air in? And how could I tell her the truth? Which was, I felt as if ghosts were whispering to me with the windows open. The feel of the wind out here was like fingertips on my neck, not pressing, exactly, just grazing, reminding me of who I was. That and the sounds, crickets chirping, faraway trains wailing, the silence that filled the space between the tree branches, like voices talking but you can't ever hear what they're saying about you. Bending down in the middle of the road now, in the whispering quiet of the night, I lifted the grill chunk of Ricky's truck in my hand. Even by moonlight I could see the part number on the back. "You drunk fool," I said out loud. The chunk must have come off when he'd slammed into the roadkill. He'd been too drunk to see it lying over the lane line of the road. I tossed the debris in my truck bed. Had the police found that on the road, they could have traced it right back to the make and model of Ricky's truck. It took more time to find the roadkill. Ricky had really dragged it deep into the woods. He would do that sometimes when he'd been drinking. He'd put in more effort than was needed to get a particular job done, as if overcompensating for his drunkenness, say burying holes too deep, for example, or setting things on fire and waiting too long to assure everything had become ashes before leaving, all while missing simple things like a grill chunk in the road, or worse. I found the roadkill's cadaver lying where he'd said, in some bushes deep in the woods. Ricky wasn't lying, it was a big sucker. I dragged it out by the legs but had to stop a few times to catch my breath. Before emerging from the woods, I waited a few seconds by the big tree, listening for any oncoming cars, knowing if I was caught here, I could land back in prison for a parole violation. The night was quiet, breathing around me. I felt as if I were being watched by 1,000 eyes. I told myself I was just feeding my family, doing what I had to do, risking it for them. I dragged the roadkill out onto the pavement. Despite how many times I dealt with dead things, I felt bad the way the poor body scraped limp against the road. Even dead, we all should have some dignity. When I managed to squat down and heave the thing up into my truck bed, I covered it with a tarp and tied it down carefully, covering it up to relieve my own worries as much as I hoped it gave comfort to it as well. Wherever this roadkill's soul had flown off to. Deer, birds, squirrels, rabbits, say how many confused animals had died on this curve of the road since it had been paved. My sins, by any account, were far less than the sins of the automobile and its endless stampede through this wilderness. And as true as I believed that to be, it didn't lessen my guilt. For tonight's roadkill, I had purposefully brought other crates and stacks of wood and buckets to situate around the body in my truck bed, to make the covered lump look less obvious. I drove slowly on my way back, weaving down the roads carved through the woods, feeling my breath calming the closer I got to the safety of my dirt driveway. I was about a mile from home when the blue and red lights of the sheriff's deputy flashed behind me. I've always prided myself on staying calm during traffic stops. Ricky, though, was something else. Back when we were still partners, I once saw Ricky dance his way out of a DUI checkpoint stop despite us having contraband in our trunk that could have sent us to prison for the rest of our lives. I say he danced and I meant it. The deputy had asked Ricky to step out of the car, then he'd had him doing the field sobriety walk, one foot in front of the other, Ricky touching a finger to his nose, when out of the blue he'd decided to spin around and do a Michael Jackson moonwalk right in front of the cruiser. Ricky chopped his feet and managed to keep swinging his arms side to side while touching his nose, spinning gracefully back around and then stopping on a dime with his arms outstretched, as if to say, "See, Tartier." I'd witnessed Ricky drink no fewer than 10 whiskey sodas that night. The officer was laughing as he let us go. "What are you so stressed about?" Ricky asked me as he drove on, lighting a cigarette and grinning at me. He even leaned out to wave at the deputy as the cruiser drove past us. I didn't say anything. All I did was lean forward, open the glove box, and put the loaded pistol I'd been clutching in my right hand back inside with the fake insurance papers. But that's it. I was calm because I knew what had to be done if things went south. On this late night, with the roadkill in my truck bed, I pulled to the side of the road and let my muscle memory kick in, the red and blue lights of the sheriff deputy's cruiser strobing inside the cabin of my truck. I had a skill where I could move my body without moving my silhouette. From behind, the deputy who pulled me over would not have seen me remove the handgun from the center console. As he walked up to my truck, he would not have seen me wedge the gun in the crevasse on the right side of my seat. Hidden, yet I could pull it out swiftly, like a cowboy drawing a pistol from a holster. My posture had remained unchanged all the while, my arm moving independently behind the cover of the seats and my own body. Then I rolled down my window and waited. The air of the woods eased into the car, filling my throat, entering me. When he got beside my open window, the deputy stepped 1 foot up on the sidebar of my truck. "Evening," he said. "Get your license and registration, please." I handed him my documents. We chatted back and forth. I was fine, steady. I didn't flinch. Then he took the documents back to his cruiser and ran my information. I paused my mind, waiting. When he came back, the deputy said, "Thought I saw you driving a little sluggish, so just wanted to check. Heard about some commotion going on tonight. You been drinking?" "No, sir." "What are you doing out this late then?" "Well, I'll tell ya," I said, and I laughed in a way that sounded like a real laugh, a non-threatening laugh, saying now, "Got 2 young kids in the house and a wife working double shifts. Hard to get much work done during the day. you know. The deputy's posture relaxed just enough for me to notice. He said, "I hear that. My wife's expecting our first." Matter of fact. Well, congratulations. And because he seemed like he might be a casual talker, I added, "You work nights normally, or just pulling doubles to get out of the house?" He grinned at that. I got the feeling he hadn't talked about it much, like he didn't have anyone around to tell. "Doubles when I can," he said, nodding. "Good to have the money. Figure it'll be hard once the baby comes." "Brother, you don't even know," I said. "That bad? Enjoy the peaceful nights of chasing down bad guys while you have the chance," I said. "A baby crying all night will make a car chase seem like a day at the lake." He exhaled out his nose, a soft laugh, and I imagined him as he must have been years earlier, a little boy at church with big dreams, as he handed my license and papers back through the open window. Then he did something he shouldn't have done. He stepped all the way back down in the dirt and glanced at the back of my truck, getting a closer look at what all I had piled up in the bed. He was a young guy, a kid, really. As he stepped up to look in my truck bed, I touched my fingers to the grip of the handgun to feel it was still there. The deputy was leaning over fully now to look in the bed. I could hear him touching at things, moving things, sniffing around. I looked straight ahead out the windshield. My grip on the handgun tightened. "Well, shoot," the deputy said a moment later, reappearing at the window. "I see you've got something in your truck bed under that tarp." "Huh?" I closed my eyes, breathing in the smell of the woods that had surrounded me. But I decided not to check what it was. The deputy said, patting his hand on the top of my truck. "Figure I can guess what's in there, huh? But ain't like deer season ain't more than 3 days off anyway. No use in bothering you about that." I opened my eyes now, my right hand releasing the grip of the handgun hidden at my side. "Well," I told him, exhaling, "I surely do appreciate you for that." "Hey, we all got to eat," he said, "and sorry for the hassle." No warning or citation. The deputy glanced to the side, then looked back at me. "And so you know, I've got no plans to report this stop to your parole officer, but when I ran your plate through Leeds, it automatically popped up in my system, which means it'll appear in your account if your PO checks. Just in case you get a call about being out so late. Shouldn't factor in, but thought it polite to give you notice." "I'm aware, but hey, appreciate the heads up all the same." "Sure, take care." "When are you expecting, by the way?" I said. I was looking at him through my side view mirror. The deputy had already started walking back to his cruiser. He turned, said, "Pardon? Your baby?" I said. "When's the due date?" He put his hands on his hips, as if he'd forgotten. "They say about 3 months. Give or take. It'll come before you know it." "Already seems like it's happening too fast." "Sure, that's all too normal," I told him. "And don't beat yourself up. Down the road, if you feel guilty about making a mistake, you can't protect them from everything. And so you know yourself, you might not sleep well the next few years. Because trust me, it can feel like the whole world got a whole lot sharper and more dangerous and evil the moment your kid arrives. It's like a light got shone and you see things in color, and you see how bad things are, for you and for everyone, and you try to fix it all while grabbing all around at what to do. But nothing can be done. Nothing can be perfect. Forgive yourself for your past mistakes. Nothing you can do about that. All you can do is try your best moving forward. Try not to make history repeat itself. For your kids' sake, and most of all, stay safe, son. These are dark woods. The young deputy stepped back into the road, his arms dangling at his side. His right hand hovered over his gun's holster. He looked like he was about to say something, like he was about to do something. Then he said, "You too," and walked back to his cruiser as I drove off. Only this time, I left my window down, feeling the ghosts at my neck the whole way home. My own father was a good man. As a child, I learned from him how to dress and butcher a deer. The animal is not so different from us, my father said, and I remember the care he took as his knife blade separated the deer's muscles from bone, sinew from flesh, his large but gentle hands placing the cuts of meat in organized piles beside him. I remembered this as I dressed the roadkill in my tool shed that night, after arriving back home from the wooded roads. My father stopped talking to me when I was 16 years old. By the time I'd been incarcerated for the first time, he was dead of a heart attack. He would not have approved of me using the skills he'd shown me the way I was using them tonight, on this mangled roadkill dragged out of the woods. But I was never a good hunter. Unlike him, I always hesitated. I would see the animal standing still in the copse of trees, its neck angled downward to drink from a stream, and I could not bring myself to pull the trigger. He saw this as a failure in me, but the truth is I had the strength and discipline never to kill anything that did not deserve it or was not out to hurt me, and in this regard, I did not understand him as much as he did not understand me. I was not responsible for this roadkill, which I was now carving up in my shed. I was just making sure the death wasn't in vain. Close to sunrise, as I was finishing up the butchering, my phone vibrated from where I'd left it on the shelf. I glanced at the screen without touching it, my hands bloody with butchered flesh. It was Ricky calling. I let it go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear his voice this close to morning. Some of the cuts of meat I bagged and put into the freezer. The good cuts I left for the fridge. When my family woke up and saw what I'd brought them, my wife would smile and tell me I was a good man, and that night, we would have the table set with delicious steaks and mashed potatoes and gravy, like Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner out of the blue. You have to count your blessings when you got them or create them, because it's hard to be a good man these days. They make it so tough to provide. You try your best and it's never enough. You got to scavenge what you can. Like Ricky said, no shame in it. The bones, from which I'd pulled loose the flesh, I started simmering in a pot to make a bone broth. The next day I would drain the bones out, including the jaw and the skull, dry them, and then crush the bones into fine powder, which I would dissolve in the streams in the backwoods a few miles away, like I always did. The hydrogen in the bones would nourish the soil would nourish the plants would yield fruit and life, or so I heard. I read that once from a science book while I'd been in prison. According to the book, the chemicals of life always reform anew, so that no death is final, no ghost beyond salvation. Seeds emerge from husks, always, but some things need to be burned altogether. As the bones were still simmering that morning, I went out to the backyard of my own family's shack and started a fire. I waited until the fire was roaring. Then I went back inside and took all the inedible remains of the roadkill and carried them outside. I placed them into the fire, piece by piece, until they caught. All around me, the birds were waking up. It was just about morning now. The first hint of sun touched the leaves of the sugar maple trees beyond my shack. I grabbed a warm can of beer from a bucket by the fire pit and cracked it open. My wife wouldn't mind. I had a lot of cooking to do that day, and I'd earned it. The beer tasted good, like I'd done something with my night. Standing by the fire, I waited until the heat had devoured the roadkill's t-shirt, his jeans and underwear, his shoes and socks. Based on the clothes, I figured he'd been homeless. There were more and more of them out in the woods these days. They'd been wandering, patting their feet at the ground. Ricky probably hadn't even seen him hobbling along the side of the road until he'd hit him. By the condition of the body, this individual hadn't taken long to die. I watched as the flames spread over the ribbons of skin I'd carved off his body, the calloused padding of his feet and toes, and the roadkill's mostly bald scalp. Oddly, his cheap wallet took the longest to melt in on itself, whatever cards or papers or pictures inside fusing together, until there was no identity left. All my years with Ricky, I never did look inside the wallets, not once. In half an hour or so, when my wife and kids came down for breakfast, I would go inside, pour some coffee, and tell them I hope they had good appetites, because tonight we would dine like the president himself. I hope you enjoyed the story. Did you see the ending coming? Have you ever been in dire straits such as those? Do you think the men were justified? Let us know what you think in the comments below. As always, be sure to smash that like button, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Until next time my friends, sleep well and thank you for tuning in.